Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. And now, speaking of confusion and vagueness, the FTC issued a new anti-fake reviews guidance, guide, and rule. And, a lot of people haven't focused on it, but it's kind of both significant and potentially problematic. So, Mike, why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. So first you have to understand what there is. It's a proposed rule. It's a preliminary rule. It's
Yes.
not finalized. So
Right.
the difference between a guideline and a rule gives the Supreme Court decided that the FTC could not impose fines under guidelines. It didn't have the authority without the adjudication of a court. So guidelines became a less powerful enforcement mechanism because they could no longer impose fines when they had judged somebody doing something wrong without going through a court. So, but with a rule is it can incur a civil penalty if it is violated. It's more like a law. With a guideline, you have to prove that they knew they were violating it, which is very difficult. You also sometimes you even have to educate the users, the business that's violating it. So a lot of times they have a second bite at the apple. Whereas with a rule, if a rule is violated, it's everybody's responsibility to know what the rules are and to follow them. So there's a difference in a guideline and a rule. And so the guideline that they proposed this time is an update to the endorsements, testimonials, and review guidelines. Now they finally sort of acknowledge the existence of reviews in these guidelines. The big issues, the big sort of concepts here, disclosure of any incentive or material relationship has to be
conflict of interest.
Any conflict of interest, no matter how small, unless it's pennies, has to be disclosed. Disclosures must be obvious and if you're
clear and conspicuous, right?
And in the mediums that you are using. If you're using both voice and video, for example, it has to be available in both. Or if you're using voice and video and text, it's got to be available in all three places. You can't just put it in one spot. You can't put it in a thread comment on a YouTube, for example. You have to put it in the YouTube. If you're doing a podcast, you put it in the podcast and whatever. And then, you can't talk about an experience. They made explicit. You can't talk about an experience or a product if you haven't tried it. You can't endorse it. If you've only tried it once, you can't suggest you use it regularly. If you thought the product was terrible and mediocre, you can't say it was good or terrific. You can't misrepresent your opinion in your experience in any way. They did make some interesting FAQ sort of explanations. They made it clear that if you donate to a charity as an incentive for review, that has to be disclosed in the review, which means it's against Google's guidelines because it can't be disclosed in the review. If it is, it gets taken out because it's against Google's guidelines. So basically, if you donate to a charity on almost any to get a review, it's against most terms of services, and thus because you can't do the disclosure. If you have friends or family, review you or a new service, they have to disclose that. They did make clear that review groups where friends of lawyers, for example, review each other, even if they use each other's services, are only legitimate if there's disclosure. And again, there can't be disclosure at Google. Therefore, review groups are out. They did say that, and they made explicit in the guidelines that you can't gate, which we've known about. And then the interesting one that came up was, if you delay negative reviews to deal with them, you have to delay positive reviews by an equal amount. Not a big deal, but if you're going to take a week or 2 weeks to fix negative reviews, you have to delay all reviews an equal amount. But in the guideline, they also have a section on contacting customers who left negative reviews and trying to make them happy. If I succeed, can I ask them to change their reviews? This is the guideline. So you're welcome to contact unhappy customers. However, asking them to change or delete their initial negative review could mislead readers. So that's the guideline. Now, the same thing when addressed in the rule at the request of the NADA, which is the National Association of Auto Dealers, they say that it wouldn't ever prohibit you and that it's okay if you ask them to change reviews. So there's a conflict on that point that they say that, as long as you can't force them to change their review, So
The,
it's
the thing I would say on that is like, wouldn't it be equally misleading to readers if the business resolved something in a positive manner and the negative review was still up there? Like if the customer ended up having a good experience, the negative review is just as misleading. So
right. I don't know what they're expecting with that, and it's contrary to what they say in the rule. The rule wouldn't prohibit such conduct, assuming that reviewers are not required to remove or change their reviews. In other words, it's perfectly legitimate under the rule to contact them, make them whole, and ask them to change it. That's totally legitimate under the rule. But if they change it or delete the initial negative reviews, that's misleading under the guidelines. So that's kind of weird.
Yeah, there's a bunch of sort of confusing and vague things in there. But one thing that strikes me, I want to say this before I lose it out of my brain, is that the best practice in this new scenario would be you delay publication of all your reviews, right, by a week or 10 days or whatever the time frame is. So you're treating them equally. The positive reviews just sit in the queue. The negative reviews, you approach all the customers and you say, "Oh, I'm sorry you had a bad experience. What can we do to make it better?" You make it better, and then you say, "If you are happy, can you update your review using the magic language or whatever?" And they do, and it's a kind of stealth review gating, right? It's I mean, it's legit.
It's business. It's best business practice, though. So
Right. But I mean, it's a sneaky review gating thing, but it is also what reviews should be doing, which is alerting businesses to problems in their product or service that they then address. Right. That is the one of the primary functions of reviews, if people are doing it correctly, is that they're getting feedback, they're responding to that feedback, and hopefully they're making their customers whole or remedying whatever the problem is. So it works conceptually at that level, but I'm just pointing out a kind of irony that there's a stealth review gating thing here if you hold back all these reviews, right? So instead of routing positive reviews immediately to whatever site and holding back negative reviews and trying to address the problem, in a kind of good faith scenario, you could still do that in under this kind of thing, if that made any sense. I don't know if it did.
Right. Yeah, it does. And it's, I mean, to me, that would make sense as a review platform.
That's what you should do if you're a business.
Right. If you're a business and a review platform, that's a service you should offer. The question I have for review platforms is, should they offer historical tracking of reviews? Should they show the original and just
drafts,
show a historical view?
Versions.
Here's the versions, right? Or not. I don't know. So on to the rules. So the proposed rule is a legal document, 100 pages long, where they have
which no one is going to read. No one is going to read that except for you, Mike.
What? What do you mean no one? I read it. What do you think I did over the 4th of July?
The entire internet.
Everyone should have done. I mean, what else do you do on 4th of July weekend but read a 100-page legalese FTC document?
Hot dog in one hand, document in the other. For my family, it was a pork sandwich. We roasted whole pork. We had 60 guests over. We had a bang-up time. Anyways, this rule allows them to fine violators without court proceedings or without, them getting a second bite to make it right, second chance to make it right. So in this, they make it clear that, one, it doesn't apply to platforms. It only applies to brokers and businesses. So it's against this rule to sell fake reviews. It's against the rules for insiders in a company to mandate reviews of their employees. If an employee were to leave a review inadvertently, that's not against the rule. It's not correct. It's not a legitimate rule under not a legitimate review under the guideline, but it's not against the rules. Purchasing reviews from fake users or non-users of a company product against the rules. Company-controlled review websites purporting to be independent is against the rule. In other words, company A can't have a review website that talks about how great they are if it looks like it's independent. Review suppression of any form, verbal, legal, or moderation-based, is against the rules.
That's intimidation? That's intimidation?
Yes, intimidation, verbal or legal threats or contracts, or moderation where you suppress it and you let
What
the
about
positive
how
sue.
does that impact the allegedly defamatory? Occasionally you have these defamation cases with some.
Well, they do provide a whole number of reasons that you can take a review down. They make those explicit,
including defamation.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a legal conclusion. It's not a self-evident thing very often.
And then you misuse of fake indicators of social media influence. If you bought followers with the intention of making you look more prominent than you are to sell goods or services, that's against the rule. And the selling of those fake indicators is against the rule.
Well, so that's a pretty significant thing. This is a digression, but the idea that there's a lot of firms that will sell followers, and the purpose of that indirectly is to sell stuff to make money, right? In most cases, but that's an interesting topic unto itself. Does that automatically make you vulnerable to some sort of civil penalty under this rule?
Assuming they have enforcement capacity, but
well,
yes,
that's really the issue in a certain way.
Right.
But keep going.
So, anyways, this is the first time they've had a rule. This is the first time that anything's de facto can lead to a civil penalty. And from what I understand, I have not seen this in the FTC. I saw it reported widely in the press that each instance could be as much as a $50,000 fine. I don't know where that came from. I can't find it in the FTC's. Maybe it's somewhere further in the FTC law about, Section 5 of the law. I don't know. Couldn't find it, though. But it's interesting. I mean, the platforms are excluded from this. Google is excluded. Amazon's excluded, which points out that the biggest problem here is that 90% of the problem is their unwillingness to police their platforms correctly. And they have no obligations under these rules to change that behavior.
Yeah, the FTC couldn't impose that on them because of Section 230. Also, they were instrumental in the creation of these rules. There was a comment period, and they all had some sort of involvement.
They did, and you can see their comments in the rules, and you can see the Dealers Association comments in the rules. So clearly, the rules are written somewhat in deference to those, which I think is interesting. On a practical sense, what I think will happen Google has gotten somewhat better at dealing with fake reviews, although the volume of fake reviews has gone so high, it's hard to know whether the total volume is less. But fake reviews occur on two levels. One is me buying fake reviews for my business to make my business look better. And then the other is the black hat, where I buy fake reviews about the other business to make them look bad. Now, it may, if I buy fake reviews about my business, that becomes an obvious offense under these rules. But if I'm on WhatsApp and I contact an Indian review company to buy fake reviews about the other business, there's no way anybody's going to know that which business bought them, other than, and it's really difficult to track that down.
Can't trace it.
You can't trace it. My contention would be that while fake positive reviews might be impacted positively by this, in other words, going down, I think fake black hat reviews tax will go up as a response. I think that I've been dealing with one for 5 months, and Google is only marginally good. In fact, with LSA, they can't deal with it at all when the reviews occur there. The regular system, once they understand that a business is being attacked, they're reasonable taking them down, but they have to understand that. It takes a month to convince them it's an attack. But I see these negative attacks as really, really being propelled forward as a response, sort of the law of unintended consequences here.
There's
Google
another
and Amazon don't do shit, then it's still going to be shit.
There's another category, which is the sort of ransomware style review attack, where you leave a bunch of 1-star reviews and say, if you give me some money, I'll take them down or whatever.
Right.
At the end of this, you touch on the most important issue, which is enforcement, and the platforms are exempted by Section 230 of COPA, the Children's Online. I don't know.
Communications Decency Act.
Communications Decency Act. Sorry, not COPA. And the as you say, the platforms have a limited incentive or no incentive really to accept shame and ultimately the real incentive is the trust of their users, but they don't seem to be taking that as seriously as they should. So it's really going to be up to the FTC to find all these cases, and their enforcement capabilities are very limited. So they're going to be restricted to finding, to making an example of certain high profile companies. So they'll periodically sue somebody and hope that the penalties and the shame are enough to deter others, but they of course won't be. And so the natural thing here would be to enlist the platforms in enforcing against fake reviews, which is they're really the only ones that can do this at any kind of scale, and they're inconsistent with this, and it's because they have this legal shield.
Right. Interestingly, there was,
except not in Europe, significantly, except not in Europe.
and particularly in France, where a platform has to prove that that the reviewer actually interacted with the business. It's the responsibility of the platform to verify the reviewer's legitimacy. Now, there was in the proposed rule a conversation about requiring verified reviews, which was objected to by, I think it was the National Federation of Small Businesses or whatever that's called, and it was not included. In other words,
what could be the possible objection, other than to just the complexity, I guess, of verifying, perhaps. But
I don't.
They want to be able to purchase reviews with impunity.
Well, right. There's many cases where people might want to review a company even if they haven't done business with them, I guess was the argument. But it was not.
And why would that be? Why would you? Who in their right mind is going to write a review of, unless you're review bombing for some political reason? Why are you going to write a review of anybody whom you haven't interacted with?
They were rude to me on the phone, but I didn't buy it from them.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, that is kind of a fair situation if you're actually a customer, would-be customer, and you're trying to warn people about their bad service. That's fair.
Right. But that was, they made clear in the rules that this was not going to be part of the rules. So in France, like I said, they do require that. So it is possible that they can.
Well, it's worth noting that even verification could be cheated, because that happens all the time on Amazon, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yes.
Well,
I don't.
People,
I'm not an
people
Amazon expert, so
people are given various incentives. They buy the product, or they go through some process where they look to Amazon like they're a purchaser. They either get a refund or they get some financial reward for providing a certain kind of review. So it's a polluted process. They may actually have, in fact, technically purchased something, but then there's some sort of taint to the whole thing.
Right. In the end, 90% of the fake reviews that people see, which, let me digress a little bit. There was an interesting thing where they were calculating the value to society of doing this in terms of billions of dollars per year over 10 years. And they tried to figure out what percentage of people see fake reviews and what percentage, are influenced by it. And one of the interesting fallacies was that they assumed that the behavior is consistent across all categories, right? And across all purchases, which I think is probably not true. I think it's, but they end up having to create this rationale to create the rule. They have to prove that the rule is going to save more money than it costs.
Right.
Which,
I did a total seat of the pants calculation, and based on the existing numbers, and it's $25 billion. There it is. Definitive.
Yeah, well, that's in the range. I think where they were. The best estimate is that
in the U.S., $25 billion a year spending is impacted by some sort of review fraud.
You'll have to look at their assessment and see. I can't remember exactly the number.
The FTC is as flimsy as anybody else when they're doing these kinds of things, because they rely on.
They quoted you.
Yeah, exactly. So just 2 seconds on that. Curtis Boyd and I put together this report for Uber. When I was at Uber, we did this report on trying to assess the depth of review fraud on the 4 major platforms: TripAdvisor, Google, Facebook, and Yelp. And we used the transparency company's methodology. I wrote the report. We jointly produced it, and we put it out, and we thought, oh, this is going to get a lot of attention. This is the first time somebody has actually done this kind of an assessment. And it got some attention, but it got relatively little attention, which was very disappointing, because this is a big deal. And so it was very gratifying for me to see that, at least in the footnotes in the FTC report, that we'd made some sort of impact, however marginal, on them. But
well, their estimates they looked at a range. They found 4 or 5 studies, and it ranged from 4 to 25% or something of all reviews were fake. and they, yours I think came in the middle of that. But
well, I mean, the Google numbers were 10.7. This was now 3 years ago. I think 10.7% of all Google reviews were in some way suspicious. Was the sort of qualified language we used. But in certain categories like moving companies and a few others, I'd have to pull it up again.
Right.
The numbers were
those
very
companies,
high.
it's 80%. Right.
Well, yeah, it was. I mean, what we found, and we used a very conservative methodology to try and err on the side of caution. It was above 20% in multiple categories on Google,
which makes it very difficult to assess the economic impact, because who knows whether those categories are less or higher dollar volume.
You can't assess the impact because you don't know who's really made a purchase in reliance on some fake review. I mean, fake reviews are threaded into the overall score. It's very, very hard, but.
And my final point, though, is just back to, if Google and Amazon are not obligated to do anything and choose to the laissez-faire approach that they've chosen historically, or the modicum of they show that they're doing something, but they don't ever apply the kind of resources that the problem takes, the problem is going to persist, because
and at the same
foreign
time,
actors or whatever.
At the same time, the ranking factors all prominently feature reviews, so the incentive to cheat is still very, very high. I mean, this is on some level kind of review enforcement theater or fake review theater, because we get a lot of pronouncements, we get a lot of head nodding, we get these rules which seemingly have a bunch of teeth, and what's going to actually happen? Not much, probably. But the vacation week isn't entirely over, so people can go out and have a beer and eat their pulled pork sandwich or vegetarian hot dog or whatever their choice of celebratory meat or quasi meat is. And we'll be back in full swing next week, I think. Less brain fog for me, at least.
Equal amount for me.
Yeah. All right. Have a good week.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.